All right. So we are continuing. I'll start with the introductory stuff, and then hopefully you'll listen on the important stuff. We're continuing our series on worldviews in conflict. Everyone you encounter, every single person, has at least one worldview, one identifiable worldview that they are working from. So inevitably, if you're dealing with different worldviews, they are going to conflict. And so how do we deal with that conflict? How do we deal with the world as Christians? So I laid out for you there a little calendar, partly so if there's one that's really important to you, you can make sure to come up to that, but also so you can see the names of worldviews that I'm going to be referencing right in front of you. Moral relativism is today, then naturalism, emotionalism, pluralism and skepticism, followed by congregational meeting. That's not actually a worldview. That's just wanted to invite you to that. I don't know what that worldview would look like. The other reason I wanted to point that out is because there's going to be lots of overlap in this series. It's a short series, but it's one we're probably going to come back to. These are not all the worldviews in existence for obvious reasons. So this is a series we'll probably come back to and do another 4-week, 6-week installment. But in these 5 in particular, there's going to be a lot of overlap. There's very often moral relativism is a product of emotionalism, which is a byproduct of pluralism. And there's a lot of overlap. You're going to hear a lot of overlap. Let that be okay with you. And part of the reason is people don't go to seminary to study pluralism. Right? Like, people don't go to skepticism university. Like, that's just not a thing. So the way that you get these worldviews is not by a church, not from a weekly gathering of how to become more emotional, but it's from their friends, it's from social media, it's from TV, it's from lots of other things. And so because you're gathering your worldview, bits and pieces of your worldview from different sources, in most conversations, and this is your first blank, you are dealing with multiple worldviews. I apologize for the mic, we're still recalibrating lots of things. In most conversations, you are dealing with multiple worldviews. You're not going to have someone introduce themselves and say, "Hi, I'm Susie and I'm a moral relativist." That's just not how it goes. But you're going to be able to pick up on some things as we roar. As we get ready to roar, which is kind of the acronym that this series is built upon, let's warm up our voices. Let's figure out what we're roaring against. Let me start off with this statement. There is no such thing as a moral relativist. There are only hints of moral relativism. There's no such thing as a true moral relativist, only hints of moral relativism. How can I say that so confidently? And do you agree or disagree? Why or why not? Do you agree that there is no such thing as a moral relativist? You're allowed to disagree even though I said it. Say it again. Because it's all relative. Yeah, that might be absolutely a reason there's no such thing. There has to be some truth somewhere. That is probably better than what I would have said. Thank you. The word relative. What does the word relative mean? Does anyone know what the word relative means? Like not, well, actually, yeah, that works. Like even your relative. In relation to. What's the next logical question? In relation to what? I'm related to them. How? Okay? In theory, someone is okay with you living out your truth. That's going to be a phrase that comes up. But in practice, everyone's going to call the cops on you if you try to steal from them. You're not going to be able to steal from someone who claims to be a moral relativist and have them say, well, they're just living out their truth. They're going to say, give me back my stuff. That is absolutely, objectively mine. And what you did is, at the very least, not okay with me. They might not say it's wrong, but they're going to say it's not okay with me. I found this good quote. The irony of relativism is that in order for something to be relative, remember the definition in relation to, there has to be something that is absolute. For example, how do I get to Stewart Coffee? Can anyone tell me? How do I get to Stewart Coffee? Turn right? Turn right. That's one direction you could give. What's another direction you could give? Turn left. It depends where you're coming from. I turn right because he's telling me directions from this absolute point. I am here. How do I get to there? I turn right. But what if I were over there? Well, then I have to turn left. And what if I were over there? Well, then I'd have to cross some train tracks. And directions, even something as simple as directions to get to a location, depend on an absolute location. It also depends on Stewart Coffee not being a food truck that can move. Turn right, yeah, because it's parked there, but what if it moves? Then I have to turn left. If the target is constantly moving, we can't really say anything, including some of the key phrases that moral relativists themselves will say. Any questions on that so far? I'm going to be doing a few check-ins, because if you're not with me, then it's going to be a long day. Yes? Sure. And before I quote that, which I've also heard, I want to lay this groundwork. One slight objection, and please hear me here. Let me figure out how to phrase this. My least favorite thing about the ROAR acronym is the word it spells out. That's my least favorite thing. Because what they actually advocate, what the authors advocate, is a gentle, compassionate, not snarky, not gotcha attitude. They actually, the first two steps are all about listening, not actually responding. But what is that word roar? I mean, what do you think of when you hear roar? Lion, bear, roar, attack you, yell at you, show you how stupid you are, ha ha ha, and then you'll agree with me. Has that ever worked ever? Have you ever humiliated someone and by doing so persuaded them to agree with you? I've never been able to. Maybe you're better at humiliating people than I am, but that's never worked. And so there's going to be lots of moments where you spot inconsistencies, and your temptation might be, let's point it out. Let's show you how inconsistent you are. Let's show you how illogical you're being right now. And I'm just going to ask you to resist, to pause, to wait, and to rephrase. Wait for other moments and other opportunities to enter the conversation. We'll get more into that, but since it was brought up, I wanted to say that. Moral relativism, as we move on, says that that we are all a product of our circumstances. If you start reading on moral relativism, you might hear the word environment. And that encompasses a lot of things: culture, time period, geography, upbringing. And if we grew up differently, in a different culture, in a different time period, in a different part of the world, we would have different morality. We are simply a product of our circumstances, and if we had different circumstances, we would have a different morality. You believe slavery is wrong because of the time period you were born in, But if you were born 300 years earlier, you'd think slavery is fine. Paul said that God ordained men and women to do certain things, but that's because women didn't have a certain education. Women weren't allowed to go to college and university. Now that they are, things are different. That's the crux. That is the central gospel of moral relativism. That is the enlightened thought that reveals everything. You are simply a product of your circumstances. So therefore, you can't tell me what to do, I can't tell you what to do, etc., etc. Any questions on that? We can always go back to it. This last thing, it's a phrase you're going to hear all throughout the book. Or through the series. It's a whole chapter in this book, and it's called Linguistic Theft. It's a concept I really want us to know, even beyond this series. Our words have been hijacked, stolen, used to mean different things. Tolerance, I can physically see some of you cringe. Tolerance is a Christian word. Make no mistake. In Ephesians and Colossians and other parts of Scripture, we are commanded to bear with one another, to not just love and like people, but to actually tolerate the annoyances, even the sins of others, to forgive. Tolerance is a Christian word. But what has happened with many different worldviews, and especially moral relativism, is tolerance has been hijacked, stolen, to mean something that we do not mean by it. So for instance, a moral relativist might say we should not interfere with the actions of persons that are based on moral judgments that we reject, when the disagreement is not or cannot be rationally resolved. This is straight from, this isn't like I heard my friend say this or I saw it on Facebook. This is from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, as they attempt to describe moral relativism. We should simply tolerate one another, especially on moral judgments, when the disagreement cannot be or will not be resolved. When it's something that you and I just disagree on and there's no way to resolve it, we should just tolerate one another. We should just let it go. Is that the tolerance that Scripture and God commands? No. I see you shaking your heads. No. So just understand that is a huge word that a moral relativism will either say or have undergirding many of their statements. That is what I believe to be the necessary background, the vocal exercises we need to warm up before we roar. Any questions on that before we actually roar? Okay. How do you know you're talking to a moral relativist? Well, they don't exist, so how are you going to know it when you hear it? Here's a few key phrases. What is true or right or good, or fill in some other word, for you may not be true, right, or good for me. It's relative, right? You think that's good, but you only think that's good because you have Swedish parents and you were in a middle-class socioeconomic level and you went to church and your parents are good people. But if you were born 400 years ago and you lived in Africa and you were poor, you wouldn't believe those things. What's true, right, good for you may not be for me. Another phrase, I know you've heard this, my or your truth. I'm just living out my truth. That's true for you. That's your truth. And therefore there's two byproducts of this, I believe. I'm the only one who can determine my truth. It's my truth. So who gets to decide my truth? Me. I decide my truth. It's mine. Who gets to decide what goes in my car? Me. My house? Me. What clothes do I wear? I decide that. Let's impose that on truth. Who gets to decide what's true for me? I do. It's my truth. Who gets to decide for you? Only you. That's the flip side. I can't tell you what's true, right, or good, even though I do. We'll get to that. Therefore, you can't force your truth on me. That's the flip side of the coin there. Okay. As you try to recognize the message, when you hear recognize the message, are you listening or talking? Listening. It's so easy, but it's also easy to miss. This requires, your next blank, listening well. I wanted you to actually physically write that word for those of you who are taking notes. Listening. This requires you to not just listen, but listen well. You're not just listening for what snappy comebacks you can express. You're actually listening to see what is it that you believe and why do you believe it. I will share this quote as often as I get opportunity. Francis Schaeffer, probably in hyperbole, was asked, what would you do if you had an hour with someone? And he said, well, again, he's probably exaggerating, but it makes a good point. I would listen and ask questions for 55 minutes. Why? In order to have something truly meaningful to say in the last 5 minutes. Once I've listened for 55 minutes and I've asked questions in order to listen well. See, sometimes listening well means talking. Isn't that funny? Sometimes listening well requires you talking, asking questions so that you can make sure you understand what you're listening. And he said, I would listen and ask questions for 55 minutes because once I've asked questions, once I've listened, now I know I have a better sense of what motivates them, what they're actually saying, not just some words that they're regurgitating. What's their motivation? What's their authority? What drives them? What makes them angry, sad, upset, joyful? And so now I have some frame, I have a better understanding of how to respond to them. And if you've listened well, you only need 5 minutes. He kind of expounded that in another book. Okay, what are we listening for? For what? You're going to hear lots of things. You're going to hear values that are praised or demeaned. This is in movies. This is in books. This is in podcasts. This is in conversations. This is in articles you see online. You're going to see certain values praised. They did this and everyone cheered. The triumphant music in the movie was played when a certain action was happening. And all the sad music, the music in minor, the music in a diminished, augmented, chaotic symphony, cacophony of sound, those depicted the bad things. You're going to hear assumptions of what is true, good, right, etc. And a good way to listen for these is to listen through the lens of this creation, fall, redemption, restoration framework. So as you go through creation, fall, restoration, redemption, you ask these questions. Creation, okay, how does this person believe things ought to be? That's creation, right? In the beginning, God created a certain kind of world. But Genesis 3, something happened. They believe something happened. They believe something is wrong with the world, and they don't have to be Christians. They also believe they know a way forward. What's the solution? They also have an idea, or you can help them come up with an idea of what the world would look like if this worldview were lived out by everyone perfectly. If everyone was an actual moral relativist, what would the world look like? If everyone just tolerated one another, what would that look like? Help me dream. That is how you can listen well, by asking these kinds of questions. Any questions from you to help you listen well and recognize the message? Yes, sir. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, so there was a video that was shared, and it's funny, kind of no matter what you're talking about, you're going to run up against these kinds of, because there's lots of overlap. So the video that was shared was not a how to identify moral relativism video. It was a video on something else, but you can see these same thoughts. What's true, right, good for you? My truth, your truth. What's true for you may not be true for me. Creation, fall, redemption, restoration. You can see these everywhere. Okay, sorry, any other questions? I want to make sure. I'm going to ask you to be my time. Can you do that? When it's 12:40, look at me. 10:40. When I've been here for 2.5 hours, give me a look. No. Good looking out. How do you offer discernment? This book and its authors offer 3 ways forward, and I like them, so I copied them here. See things accurately. That's the first one. That's recognizing the actual, and I almost put that word actual before message. Recognize the actual message, not just a straw man. And for those of you who weren't here last week, a straw man is an unrealistic opponent, an easily defeated opponent that you have set up for yourself. It's not actually what they believe. It's not an actual man who can fight back, has bones and muscles. It's a straw man. It's a man made out of straw. He just sits there, he takes your beatings, he doesn't respond, and he's easily defeated. Okay? Well, you just, moral relativism just says that anything goes. But, look how ridiculous that is. Defeated. And you feel really good about yourself, and you haven't actually accomplished anything. Understand the nuances of what they believe. Understand what they would say in a certain situation. If you want to skip ahead, that takes discussion, that takes discipleship, that takes time. We'll get there in a moment, in 2 hours apparently. But it takes time. You're not going to glean this from a 5-minute conversation always. So, see things accurately, avoiding the straw man. Number 2, correctly identify the good. This is, I would confidently say, the hardest part for many of us. It is really hard to see the good in something that we identify as primarily not good. This is bad. Moral relativism is bad. It goes against Scripture. God does not see moral relativism as good. And I'm not telling you to see moral relativism as good. I'm telling you to parse, filter the good that is contained within. I'll elaborate in just a moment. Number 3 is correctly identify the bad. So, our first response is not correction. That's the third response. That's correctly identify the bad. Our first response is acknowledgement. Not correction, but acknowledgement. What do we acknowledge? You acknowledge the image of God. That is something that everyone has. You can't argue from Scripture with everyone. Not everyone takes it as an authority. You can't argue that everyone has the Spirit of Christ. That belongs only to believers. Scripture itself tells us everyone is made in the image of God. Everyone has something of God in them. And so as you're listening, you can ask yourself, what good reason do they have for believing this? What godly traits are you hearing in their desires, their intents, their feelings, their rationale? So let me ask you, and this is a tough question if you haven't really thought it through before. What good is there behind moral relativism thinking? What good desire, what good outcome are they looking for? What bad outcome are they trying to avoid? Any one of those. You can go through the creation, fall, redemption, restoration framework and see if you come up with anything. So I want to ask you, what good can we acknowledge? Say that again? They seek truth. In what way?
Even if it's their truth or somebody else's truth, at least they have that aspect of wanting truth.
Okay. Yeah, even if it's their truth and your truth, there is a desire for what they would call truth. Another example of linguistic theft is even the word truth. Crazy world we're living in. Yes. Peace. Again, another word that's been stolen. Peace, shalom, means something different in Scripture. But this idea of conflict avoidance. We have a series on worldviews and conflict. But let's not argue. Can we please get along? Can we just not argue about these petty things? Can we focus on what's important, like world hunger? Can we get rid of homelessness instead of arguing about who I can date? Can we not argue about that and focus on important issues? Let's have peace. Yeah. What else? Please elaborate before I explain.
About moral relativism, by virtue of the fact that the word being moral is used, there's some standard by which a situation is judged by wrong or bad, illegal, moral, or immoral,
Sure.
ethical, unethical.
That's good. So when we're talking about morals, that is a good desire. And when you are in the next section arguing for a healthier approach, one of the things you can say as you bring up examples, they're going eventually, this person you are speaking to is going to set up some situation in which they believe something is good or bad for everyone. Otherwise, the worst you could say about the Holocaust is, I disagree with it. Like, really, is anyone willing to go there? Is anyone you're speaking with willing to say that, well, the Holocaust wasn't wrong objectively, but I disagree with it. I reject that. That's not my truth. I personally don't know anyone who would be willing to go that far. If you do, we can talk. But at that point, you can say, so see, that's good. You have a good understanding that some things are all wrong or all good or always wrong. That can be a trampoline you can then jump from to the next thing. In the interest of moving on, acknowledge what is good, true, right? Right. What good thinking is behind their approach. We've already hit on these, and then this last one. This one's important. Acknowledge our faults. And what I mean by our is not you specifically, things that you individually have done. We're speaking here of our family name, Christians. People who bear the name of Christian, organizations that call themselves a church, have not caused, but contributed to the making of moral relativism. Here's what I mean by that. A moral relativist wants to push back on things that are not absolutely true for everyone. They say that's true for you, but not for me. Can you think of any examples of Christians, either present or past, making absolutes where Scripture does not? Can you think of any examples of Christians, past or present, making absolutes where Scripture, God, does not. Sure. Prosperity gospel. There you go. Okay, so that's a that one's harder to get to, but sorry, go ahead.
How about same-sex marriage?
You're help me.
There are organizations who call themselves Christian who advocate uphold same-sex marriage,
I see.
but Scripture does not.
Yeah. I would actually say that's contributing to moral relativism in a different way. Let me rephrase, because I'm playing the guess what I'm thinking game, and you're not supposed to do that as a teacher. I'm thinking of dating. I have personally been a part of churches where they have told me dating is sinful, dating is evil, dating is bad, don't date. Does Scripture say that? Is there anywhere in Scripture that might lead us to that thought? No. In fact, the book cites the example of Joshua Harris and the I Kiss Dating Goodbye and the harm that book has done across evangelical America, and the fact that he apologized for the book. That's the example that these authors use. But I'm thinking of alcohol. Does Scripture call alcohol bad? No. In fact, in Psalm 104, it is given for the delight of men. The warning is against abuses of alcohol, using it in a way it wasn't intended to be used. But our brothers and sisters, and we have to own this, our brothers and sisters, some of our brothers and sisters, not all, have made absolute claims. All alcohol is bad. Do not drink alcohol. Ever, in any situation, in any amount. We've made absolutes where Scripture does not. Yeah, okay, now the examples are flowing. Thank you, yeah. I should have started. Make a note. Yes. Dancing, playing cards, what movies you should watch, what music you should listen to, who you spend your time with. We've made absolutes where Scripture does not. And if you pause for a moment, I think it's not hard to see how moral relativism can be a response in the opposite direction of that. Everyone is responsible for their own actions. Everyone is responsible for their own actions. But let's also recognize where we have either helped or not in those areas. And you might be talking to someone, I know I have recently, where that's necessary, and you need to acknowledge, yeah, you're right. Christians shouldn't have said that. We shouldn't have done that. That's actually not what the Bible is all about. That's actually not what God is all about. Any questions before I move on to this last little section? Okay. When you recognize the message, I would urge you to use these cues as a way to enter the conversation, not opportunities to defeat the opponent. You are not looking for chink in the armor so that you can stab the sword of truth and annihilate them. That's not the goal here. Remember, according to Colossians chapter 2, who are we dealing with here? Say it again. Powers and principalities, yep, and every person that has been deceived by other worldviews. How does Colossians describe them, you remember? Let no one take you captive. These are captives. Think of them as hostages, if that's more helpful. In the book, I debated whether or not to include this, but it was a good picture. In these authors present this picture of this person being held hostage. And what do law enforcement officials do when there's a hostage situation? They try to separate the hostage from the hostage taker. Because if all they do is throw a truth bomb, they call them truth bombs, into the mix, into the mix, you risk harming the hostage as well. So you try to separate, you try to offer discernment and separate them and what they so fervently identify with what is actually true. There's some point at which any relativist will become absolute. You guys have hinted at this, we've already talked about this. Everyone is going to say, you may not steal from me. Lots of people are going to say murder is wrong, not just wrong for me, but wrong. If you tried to hurt me, I wouldn't just say, well, you're living out your truth. I'm going to say, please stop, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you argue for a healthier approach? Yes.
I find that these conversations are not as often. I feel like I'll get in a group of women who say believers and non-believers, and we don't talk about anything. Now it's like we don't want to discuss what truth is. We don't want to talk. We all put our little happy smiley faces on, and there's no conversation whatsoever. You do you, I'll do me, and we're all going to have a nice lunch or a nice, whatever. And we don't. I mean, I think to me, in my walk, it's getting worse and worse. You can't really have these true conversations.
Yeah.
In a negative way or in a positive.
Sure. So the very real objection was brought up. These conversations aren't happening. Yeah? Sorry. Yeah, please. I have an answer. No. I just meant, like, I have an answer, which is you. Go. Yeah. So so the objection was brought up that these conversations aren't taking place, and the context of the book was brought up. The context of the book is Mama Bear Apologetics, or Papa Bear, So the book is about training your children, but it's applicable in a wide variety of ways. What I would suggest to you is that those conversations aren't happening with you, but they are happening. They're hearing from social media, from the news outlets, from other people what to believe and how to believe, and it's being assumed as true. Those are part of the assumptions. And so it's our job to enter into the conversation. With children, we have unlimited access. With others, we have to work at it more through discussion, discipleship. Absolutely. Absolutely. It has to happen. So we're called to be intentional. We're called to have these conversations. We will develop skills as we do it more. I'll address that in the exclusive bonus content at the bottom. Let me fly through this for the sake of time. Argue for a healthier approach. This is I literally just made this up, so I don't know if somebody else has done the same thing, but here we go. The circle of persuasion. You start with examples, let them lead you to assertions, and follow those by questions. Then rinse and repeat. So you say that it's okay for you to be in a relationship with whomever you want, but it's not okay for me, right? That might be an example, also mixed in with a question, okay? How come? Like, how come it's right for you but not right for me? Well, it's my life, my body, who are you to tell me, etc. You're going to get any number of answers. That's why I can't give you a script. You're going to get any number of answers, because this person is not just a moral relativist. They are also an emotionalist, maybe. They're also a pluralist. They're also a naturalist. Then you make an assertion. So you're rephrasing it. You're saying that you have ultimate authority over your decisions. Am I hearing you correctly? Make sure you are. Okay, question. But what if that wasn't the case? And you can get into the C.S. Lewis boat thing, right? Okay, I can do whatever I want with this boat unless it's not my boat. I can put whatever I want in this car. I can drive this car wherever I want. But what if it was your car? Would you be okay with that? Would you be okay with me driving your car and doing whatever I wanted with your car? No, it's your car. You get to say what. That's a little peek, a little entrance into the gospel, where you can insert gospel truths and hopefully invite further conversation. Etc. And then again, rinse and repeat. Another example, another assertion, more questions, followed by assertions, followed by more examples that are relatable to them. Eventually, you will get to the bottom. You dig deep enough and you will get to the bottom. You will see what is the fundamental assumption. There is an assumption that has gone unchallenged. It is your job to insert truth into that. I see our children waiting patiently. Let me say this. Reinforce this through discussion, discipleship, and prayer. This takes time, intentionality. So meditate on the reason behind the rules. Parents, why do you instruct your children to do certain things? You do not always have time to explain to them why. I tell this to my children all the time. Obey first, then you may ask questions. If I ask you to come here, run. Then you can ask, hey, Daddy, why'd you ask me to come here? There's a priority. However, sometimes, well, son, I asked you to come here because there was a giant bear behind you and I wanted you not to get attacked, so thank you for coming here. There was a reason. Thank you for obeying first. So as parents, one of the greatest things we can do is explain the reason behind some of the things that we do, even if that's not always possible. But as Christians, who aren't always talking to Christians or children, why does God tell us to do and not to do certain things? Sometimes God tells us exactly why. Sometimes he doesn't. But as we discuss these with the people we're talking to, I think that opens a door into greater conversations, more questions, and etc. The last thing I would tell you is ask yourself a question. How would you answer yourself? Sometimes we set up these hypothetical conversations, again, with straw men. But imagine you were a moral relativist. Imagine you had to defend the moral relativist position. That this is like debate 101. You put yourself in the shoes of the person you're debating against and prepare as if you were defending against Christianity. What would be your objection? If you can't answer that, take some time. Take some time to meditate, to study, etc. And then finally, genuinely pray and, in response to the question before, find times to disciple. Because a lot of our problem is access. You meet with someone once every 3 months. What are you going to talk about? How are the kids? How are the family? How's the house? How's the job? You meet with someone 3 times a week. There's only so much you can talk about. How's the family? How are the kids? How's the job? Eventually, you're going to get into deeper things. That just takes time. The exclusive bonus content that you can only get if you are here is seek help. It is okay. You do not have all the answers. I do not have all the answers. I'm not asking you to come to me for help. I'm asking you to seek help. Wherever that is, however that comes, seek help. If you don't have the answers, say that. If you don't know, find out. But we are here to help you as elders and your pastors. Thank you for tolerating that. Next week we'll look at naturalism, and we'll be right on time. Thank you.